I sit with you in silence, not to teach you something new, but to help you remember what your heart has always known. You fear death because you believe it is a wall, a closing, a disappearance. Yet when you look closely at life, you will see that nothing truly ends. The breath you release does not vanish. It becomes air for another being. The leaf that falls does not die. It becomes soil, and from that soil, another tree rises. What you call death is often only a doorway that your mind does not recognize. When people came to me, their eyes heavy with grief, they asked where their loved ones had gone. They wanted directions, a place, a certainty. But the river does not go somewhere when it meets the ocean. It changes its name. Your life also changes its name. The form dissolves, but the movement continues. Fear is born from clinging to form, and peace is born from seeing movement. Imagine a lamp in a quiet room. When the flame goes out, you say the light is gone. But the fire has not disappeared into nothingness. It has simply ceased to burn in that particular place. The warmth spreads, the smoke rises, the elements return to their vastness. So it is with the body. So it is with what you call yourself. The first days after death are difficult, not because the one who has left is suffering in the way you imagine, but because the living are holding too tightly. Grief is love that does not yet know where to rest. The mind keeps calling a name, expecting a reply from the same doorway, but existence has already opened another door. I have watched people sit beside a silent body and speak as if the person were still listening. In a way, they are not wrong. Presence is more subtle than the senses. You have felt someone thinking of you from far away. You have entered a room and sensed tension without a single word spoken. Life communicates beyond the visible, and death does not interrupt that communication as completely as you believe. The first days are like standing at the shore while a boat disappears into mist. You cannot see the traveler anymore, but the journey continues. Your pain comes from the eyes, not from truth. The eyes demand form. Truth moves without needing to be seen. There is a story I once shared with a grieving mother who could not accept the loss of her child. She believed her suffering was unique, that the world had singled her out. I asked her to bring me a handful of mustard seeds from a home that had never known death. She walked through the village, knocking on doors. Each house had its own story of loss. By the time she returned, she carried no seeds, but she carried understanding. Death is not an interruption of life. It is woven into it, like night woven into day. When you understand this, the first days after death become less frightening. They become a period of transition, not punishment. Just as sleep allows the mind to loosen its grip on the day, death allows consciousness to loosen its grip on identity. The habits of a lifetime do not disappear instantly. They echo. Thoughts continue like a bell still vibrating after it has been struck. This is why intention matters while living. The direction of your mind becomes the direction of your movement beyond the body. If a person has lived in constant fear, the mind may create confusion in that transition, just as anxious dreams disturb sleep. If a person has lived with awareness, the transition becomes softer, like a familiar path walked at dusk. Nothing mystical is required, only attention, only the willingness to see life as it is, without denial. You ask what happens in those early days, but a better question is how you are living now. The first days after death are not separate from the last days of life. They are a continuation. The river does not change its nature when it enters the ocean. It reveals it. In the same way, death reveals the patterns you carried quietly for years. I have seen people who feared death suddenly become gentle when they understood this. They stopped postponing kindness. They spoke the words they were saving. They forgave sooner. Awareness of death does not darken life. It clarifies it. When you know time is fragile, each moment becomes luminous. Sit with this thought without rushing to conclusions. You are not a fixed object moving toward an end. You are a process moving through forms. Childhood disappeared, yet you did not call it death. Yesterday disappeared, yet you did not mourn it in the same way. Forms dissolve constantly. Death is only the largest example of something that has been happening all along. The mind resists because it wants permanence, where existence offers movement. Suffering begins there. Peace begins when you stop demanding that the wave remain a wave forever and allow it to become ocean. In the quiet after someone leaves, listen carefully. Beneath the sorrow there is stillness. Beneath the stillness there is continuity. Love does not end with the body because love was never contained by it. What ends is the familiar gesture, the voice, the routine. What remains is the connection that was never visible to begin with. If you sit long enough with your fear of death, you will notice something surprising. The fear is not of non-existence. The fear is of losing what you know. The unknown appears empty only because the mind has no memory of it. But the unknown is also where every beginning has come from. You were once unknown to yourself. Life emerged anyway. So when you think about the first days after death, do not imagine a distant realm. Think of it as a loosening, a soft unwinding of the knots you tied while living. Some knots release easily, others take time. Compassion is needed, not judgment. This is true for the living and for those who have left. Sit quietly now and notice your breath. Each inhale arrives, each exhale leaves. You do not panic when the breath leaves because you trust another will come. Death asks for the same trust on a larger scale. The rhythm continues even when the form changes. And when you understand this deeply, something inside you relaxes. Life is no longer a race against an ending. It becomes a participation in a flow that has no true beginning and no final edge. I remain with you in this quiet space, where questions about death begin to soften and turn into questions about life. When someone leaves the body, the silence that follows can feel heavy, as if the world itself paused. But existence never pauses. Only your attention narrows. The birds still sing. The light still moves across the wall. The breath still enters and leaves you. This is not indifference. This is continuity. In those early days, the mind searches for certainty. It wants a map of what cannot be mapped. Yet you have already experienced transitions many times. When you fell asleep as a child, you did not know where the mind went, yet morning always arrived. Death carries a similar mystery, but the mind resists because it cannot return in the same way. Still, mystery is not an enemy. It is the space where understanding grows slowly, like a seed beneath soil. I have watched families gather around memories, repeating stories, holding objects, listening to old recordings of a voice that once filled the room. This is natural. The heart tries to keep continuity through remembrance, but remembrance is not meant to trap you in the past. It is meant to help you see that what you loved was never only the form. You love the presence, the warmth, the awareness shining through that form. Presence does not belong to one body. It is a quality of life itself. Consider the sky after a cloud dissolves. You may say the cloud is gone, but the sky has not lost anything. The moisture returns as rain. The shape disappears. The essence continues its movement. Your grief comes from loving the shape, while existence moves through essence. When you begin to see this, grief becomes gentler. It still visits, but it no longer feels like a prison. The first days after death are often described as a journey. yet journey suggests distance, and distance belongs to the physical world. What truly happens is a shift in identification. The awareness that once said, "I am this body," begins to release that certainty. This release is not always immediate. Just as you sometimes wake from sleep and for a moment do not know where you are, there can be a period of adjustment, a quiet reorientation. This is why the atmosphere around death matters. When the living are frantic, fearful, and clinging, that confusion echoes. When there is calm, gratitude, and acceptance, that calm also echoes. You influence one another more deeply than you realize. Even now, your inner state shapes the invisible environment around you. This is not superstition. It is sensitivity. There was a man who spent his life collecting things, believing security lived in accumulation. When he grew old, his house was full, yet his mind was restless. As death approached, he became anxious, not because he was leaving life, but because he could not carry his collections with him. Another man owned very little, but had cultivated attention. When his final days came, he spoke softly, thanked those around him, and closed his eyes like someone placing a book back on a shelf after reading it fully. Both experienced death, but their relationship to it was shaped by how they had lived. You cannot control the fact of death, but you can influence your relationship to it. Each moment of awareness is preparation, not in a fearful sense, but in a liberating one. When you learn to let small things end a conversation, a day, an expectation, you are learning the same art on a smaller scale. Letting go is not loss. It is participation in movement. In many traditions, people speak about the first 13 days as significant. Numbers are symbols the mind uses to hold something subtle. What matters is not the number, but the recognition the transition is gradual. Just as twilight does not become night instantly, the shift from embodied life to another mode of being carries phases of softening. The mind reviews, releases, reorganizes, patterns surface and dissolve. What was unfinished asks for understanding, not punishment. You have experienced this after any major change. When you leave a place you lived for years, your body moves first, but your mind lingers. You remember the sounds, the routes, the small habits. Slowly, those impressions loosen. Death mirrors this process on a deeper level. Awareness untangles itself from familiarity. The untangling can feel confusing if there was strong attachment, and peaceful if there was acceptance. This is why compassion toward the dying is more important than explanations. Words try to describe what must be felt. Presence communicates more clearly. Sitting quietly beside someone, holding their hand, breathing slowly, these are teachings without language. They remind both of you that life is larger than fear. Notice how often you resist endings, even in ordinary moments. You keep conversations alive after they have finished. You replay events in your mind, wishing they were different. The habit of resistance creates tension, and that tension shapes how you approach the final letting go. But when you practice allowing moments to complete themselves, a different relationship appears. You begin to trust completion. Completion is not emptiness. It is fullness that no longer needs continuation. A fruit falls when it is ready, not because the tree rejects it, but because ripeness has been reached. In the same way, life completes forms continuously. Understanding this does not remove sadness, but it removes the sense of injustice that often accompanies sadness. Sit with your breath again. Feel how each exhale is a small surrender. You do not hold the air out of fear that the next inhale will not come. You trust the rhythm. Death invites trust in a rhythm you cannot see yet, but have always been part of. The ocean does not worry about the wave returning. The wave worries because it believes it is separate. There is also something gentle that happens in those early days. The living begin to see what truly mattered. Regrets surface, but so does gratitude. People remember kindness more vividly than achievement. They remember presence more than possessions. Death reveals value with clarity. If you listen carefully, it teaches the living how to live. You may notice that after loss, small things feel more meaningful: sunlight on the floor, the taste of tea, a simple conversation. This is not sentimentality. It is awareness sharpened by impermanence. When you remember that everything changes, attention deepens. Life becomes immediate instead of postponed. The story of the first days after death is therefore not only about the one who has left. It is about the transformation of those who remain. Grief rearranges priorities. It softens arrogance. It opens questions that comfort once kept hidden. In this way, death continues to teach even after the body is gone. If you sit quietly tonight and allow the thought of death without pushing it away, you may feel fear at first. Stay with it gently. Beneath fear there is curiosity. Beneath curiosity there is stillness. And within that stillness there is a recognition that you have always been part of something that does not begin with your birth and does not end with your final breath. Let this recognition grow slowly, like dawn spreading across the sky. Nothing needs to be forced. Understanding ripens when attention is patient, and as patience deepens, the story of death changes. It is no longer a closing page. It becomes a turning page, one movement in a book that has always been larger than a single chapter. Remain with me a little longer in this quiet unfolding, where the mind begins to see that what it called an ending was often only a change in visibility. When someone you love leaves the body, the senses search for confirmation and do not find it. The chair is empty, the phone is silent, the familiar rhythm of presence disappears. The mind calls this absence. But absence is only the name given to a form that is no longer accessible to the senses. Existence does not rely on your senses to continue. In the days that follow, memory becomes a bridge. At first it feels painful because memory shows what is no longer physically available. Yet slowly, memory changes its role. It stops reopening the wound and begins preserving the fragrance. You no longer remember only the loss. You remember the laughter, the small gestures, the way ordinary moments carried quiet meaning. This shift is important. It is the heart learning that connection is not confined to proximity. There is a subtle movement that happens within awareness when identity loosens. All your life you say, "This is me, this is mine." You draw boundaries around experience and call them self. Death gently erases those boundaries. What you believed was contained begins to reveal its openness. Like a drop realizing it was always water, awareness begins to feel less separate. This realization may come softly, without words, like a recognition you cannot fully explain but cannot deny. The early days of transition are often described through images, because the mind understands images more easily than silence. Some speak of light, some of dreams, some of familiar faces appearing in memory-like clarity. Whether these are literal or symbolic matters less than what they point toward. The mind moving through its own patterns, releasing, reorganizing, understanding. Just as your dreams reflect your inner life, transition reflects the momentum of your consciousness. Think about how you wake from a long dream. For a few moments, the dream feels real, then its structure dissolves. Emotions may linger even when the images fade. In a similar way, the impressions of a lifetime do not vanish instantly. they soften gradually. Awareness begins to recognize that it is not limited to the story it carried. This recognition can feel peaceful, like loosening tight clothing after a long journey. For the living, these days invite a different kind of listening. Instead of asking where the person has gone, you begin to notice what their life continues to move within you. Perhaps you speak more gently because of them. Perhaps you choose differently because of something they once said. Influence does not end with physical departure. In many ways, it becomes clearer because distraction is reduced. The form is gone, but the meaning remains. There was an old gardener who lost his friend after many years of working side by side. For weeks, he continued tending 2 sets of plants, watering both gardens. Someone asked why he did this when his friend was no longer there. The gardener smiled and said that care had become a habit of the heart, not a response to a person standing nearby. Love had shifted from relationship to quality. This is the quiet teaching hidden inside loss. You begin to understand that what truly continues is not personality, but the essence expressed through it. Personality is like clothing, necessary, expressive, temporary. Essence is the warmth you felt, the awareness behind the eyes, the stillness present in moments without words. When the clothing falls away, essence is not destroyed. It is simply no longer shaped by the same outline. The mind struggles because it seeks continuity in familiar terms. It wants the same voice, the same gestures, the same patterns, but continuity often appears differently than expectation. A lesson remembered, a kindness repeated, a perspective shifted. These are forms of continuation the mind initially overlooks because they're subtle. Yet subtlety is where life often reveals its depth. As days pass, you may notice that grief changes texture. It becomes less sharp, more spacious. Tears still come, but they carry less resistance. This does not mean forgetting. It means integration. The experience is no longer something happening to you. It becomes something moving within you. Pain begins to coexist with gratitude. And this coexistence is a sign of healing, not betrayal. Awareness of death also reveals something about time. You see how quickly moments pass, how easily attention drifts, how often life is postponed. This realization is not meant to create urgency filled with anxiety, but presence filled with clarity. When you know that everything changes, you stop waiting for the perfect moment to be sincere. You understand that sincerity itself creates the moment. In the transition beyond the body, the same principle applies. What you cultivated while living becomes the atmosphere you move through. If you practiced awareness, awareness feels familiar. If you practiced avoidance, confusion may feel familiar. This is not reward or punishment. It is continuity of habit. The mind moves along the paths it walked most often. Consider a musician who has practiced for years. When they sit before an instrument, the fingers move without conscious effort. In the same way, the patterns of your consciousness continue their movement even when the body is no longer the stage. This is why living with attention is an act of compassion toward your future. In forms you may not yet understand. The first days also invite the living to release unfinished conversations internally. You may speak words in silence that were never spoken aloud. You may forgive, express gratitude, or simply sit with what cannot be resolved. This process is not imaginary. The mind seeks completion, and completion brings peace. When you allow these silent conversations, you loosen the knots that bind memory to regret. Notice how nature handles transition. The setting sun does not argue with the horizon. Autumn does not apologize for falling leaves. Movement is accepted as part of balance. Human suffering often arises from believing that change should not apply to what we love. Yet love is not protected by permanence. Love is deepened by awareness of fragility. When you know something is temporary, you hold it more gently. In these days of reflection, you may feel moments of unexpected calm and wonder if something is wrong because you are not constantly sad. Nothing is wrong. Calm is not forgetting. Calm is the nervous system recognizing safety again. Grief moves like waves. Between waves there is still water. Allow both. Resistance to calm prolongs suffering just as resistance to sadness does. As understanding deepens, the question shifts from, "Why did this happen?" to, "How will I live now knowing this?" This question carries power because it returns you to responsibility. Death reminds you that life is participatory. You are not only an observer of change, you are a participant in meaning. Each choice becomes a continuation of what you value. Sit again with a simple rhythm of breathing. Notice how each breath is both arrival and departure. Life has always contained this pattern. The first days after death simply reveal it more clearly. When you see this without turning away, something inside you softens. Fear loses its sharp edges. Curiosity grows. And within curiosity, there is space for a deeper trust, the trust that existence is movement, and you have never been separate from its flow. I remain with you as the understanding becomes quieter and simpler. After the first waves of grief and questioning, something gentle begins to appear, a space where you are no longer trying to hold the person in the same way. You begin to feel them differently. Not as a presence in front of you, but as a presence within your awareness. This shift is subtle, almost invisible, yet it changes everything. You stop asking where they are and start noticing how they continue. In these days, the mind reviews. Moments return not in order, but in feeling. A smile, a conversation, a silence shared. Awareness gathers meaning the way the evening gathers light, slowly, without effort. Nothing needs to be forced. Completion is happening quietly. What was unfinished finds a place to rest, not because every question is answered, but because the heart accepts that life was never meant to be perfectly resolved. You begin to see that death reveals truth rather than removing it. What was real remains real. Kindness remains. Love remains. What was superficial fades more quickly. This is why memory eventually becomes peaceful. It keeps essence and releases noise. The mind learns the difference between what mattered and what only seemed important at the time. The one who has left is also moving through a soft recognition. The recognition that identity was a role, not the whole. Like an actor stepping away from a character, awareness loosens from the story it carried. There may be moments of familiarity, echoes of habits, but gradually, a wider silence becomes comfortable. Not empty, but open. Not lonely, but spacious. For the living, these days invite a quiet promise. To live in a way that leaves less unsaid, less postponed, less hidden behind fear. Death does not demand perfection. It invites sincerity. When you understand this, you become more present with ordinary things, listening fully, speaking honestly, appreciating without waiting for loss to create value. Sit with this gently. Nothing needs to be solved. Understanding ripens through attention, not effort. And as attention deepens, the story of endings becomes the story of transformation. I sit with you once more as this reflection reaches its natural stillness. The fear that once appeared as a wall now begins to look like mist. You cannot grasp mist, yet you can walk through it. Death is like that, unclear to the mind, but not hostile to awareness. The more you resist, the denser it feels. The more you allow, the more transparent it becomes. The first days were never about distance. They were about adjustment, awareness, learning to move without the familiar anchor of form. And for you who remain, they were about remembering that connection does not rely on visibility. You carry forward what was given, often without noticing. A way of speaking, a way of caring, a way of seeing the world. Continuation happens through living. If you listen very quietly, beneath grief and beneath thought, there is a simple recognition. Life has always been change, and change has never destroyed its essence. Waves rise and fall, yet water remains. Forms appear and disappear, yet existence continues expressing itself in new shapes, new moments, new lives. Let this understanding rest rather than become another idea to hold. Peace comes when you stop demanding certainty from mystery. You do not need to know every step of the path to walk it. You only need to trust that movement itself is natural. So when you think of death, do not think of a final closing. Think of a returning, a loosening, a widening of what was once tightly defined. And when you think of life, see it not as something you must protect from ending, but something you are invited to experience fully while it unfolds. Sit, breathe, notice that you are here. Notice that this moment is complete even as it passes. This is the quiet teaching hidden in every ending. Nothing real is lost, only transformed. And in that transformation, the flow continues, patient and vast, carrying you the way it has always carried everything. And now, there is nothing more to add, only something to feel. When words become fewer, understanding becomes closer. You have walked through the question of death and discovered that what frightened you most was the idea of disappearance. Yet again and again, life shows you that disappearance is only change beyond recognition. Look at yourself. The person you were years ago is no longer here in the same way. Your thoughts have changed, your body has changed, your understanding has changed. Yet you do not mourn each past version of yourself as a death. You accept transformation when it happens slowly. Death appears frightening because it is a transformation that happens quickly to the form, while awareness continues in a way the mind cannot measure. In the quiet after loss, something sacred becomes possible. You begin to live with a softer grip. You argue less over small things. You notice moments you once ignored. This is not sadness shaping your life. It is clarity. Impermanence removes the illusion that there will always be more time to be present. And when that illusion fades, presence becomes natural rather than forced. The one who is left is not asking you to hold pain as proof of love. Love does not need suffering to be real. Love continues as attention, as kindness extended to others, as the courage to remain open even after experiencing loss. In this way, what you received does not end. It circulates through you and into the world, quietly, without announcement. There is a deep peace hidden inside the understanding that nothing was ever owned. You were given moments, relationships, experiences not to keep, but to live. When you see this clearly, gratitude replaces the question of why something ended. You stop measuring life by duration and begin feeling it by depth. A brief moment, lived fully, carries more truth than a long time lived unconsciously. Death then becomes a teacher of proportion. It shows you what is small and what is essential. It dissolves the urgency of things that once seemed heavy and brings attention to what was always simple presence, connection, awareness, breath. These were never secondary. They were always the center, but the mind often stands at the edges. Sit quietly now, as if nothing needs to be solved. Feel the body breathing without instruction. Feel thoughts moving without needing to follow each one. In this simple noticing, you experience the same movement that exists beyond birth and beyond death awareness, witnessing change without being destroyed by it. The story of the first days was never meant to give you certainty about another world. It was meant to help you see this one more clearly. When you understand that everything changes, you stop waiting for a perfect life and begin participating in the life that is here. You speak while you can speak. You listen while you can listen. You love without postponing expression. And slowly, fear loosens its place inside you. Not because you have answers, but because you are no longer demanding that mystery behave like certainty. Mystery becomes space instead of threat. Space allows movement. Movement allows life to continue expressing itself in ways the mind cannot predict. So remain gentle with yourself. Grief may return, memories may rise, questions may appear again. This is natural. Understanding is not a single moment, but a deepening relationship with truth. Each time you remember that change is not destruction, you return to peace a little more easily. Nothing real was ever asking to be permanent. It was asking to be experienced. When you see this, endings lose their sharpness. They become part of the rhythm you have always lived, within arrival and departure, holding and releasing, form and openness. Sit with one final recognition. You are not separate from the flow that carries birth and death. You are that movement appearing for a while as a person, a story, a voice. And when the story changes, the movement does not stop. It continues, quiet and vast, the same way the ocean continues long after a wave settles back into its depth.